Edmund Blake was a vanished banker, Jenna Miles a murdered farm girl, Liam Carroll a drug-running paramedic, Oscar Flint a dead student dealer, and Professor Henry Dalmore the mastermind behind them all. Each name a thread in a web of cocaine-fueled corruption that quietly reshaped British society from the inside out. As their stories unfold, so does the terrifying truth: the Mirror Syndicate wasn't just a criminal network. It was a reflection of the system itself. Edmund Blake was the kind of man people rarely questioned. A well-respected investment banker in London's financial district, he was known for his discipline, punctuality, and clean-cut image. His co-workers admired his suits and sharper mind. Neighbors recalled him as quiet but polite, someone who kept to himself but always nodded when passing by. He lived in a luxury house in Kensington with his wife, Claire Blake, and seemed to have everything: a successful career, an elegant home, and no known enemies. That's why his disappearance in February 2018 shocked everyone who knew him. It began with a missed board meeting. Then, his phone went straight to voicemail. His office reached out to Claire, who hadn't seen Edmund since he left for work 2 days prior. The police were notified, and a missing persons investigation began. His car was found neatly parked in the building garage. His briefcase was still in the front seat. No signs of struggle, no notes, no indication he had planned to go anywhere. Surveillance footage from his building showed him exiting the elevator but never re-entering. After that, it was as if he had vanished into thin air. Investigators dug into his financial records and personal history but found no signs of distress or foul play. His bank accounts were untouched. There were no large cash withdrawals, no strange transactions. But Claire mentioned something curious during questioning. Over the past month, Edmund had been behaving oddly. He was jumpy, irritable, and lost in thought. He'd stopped sleeping well, often waking up in the middle of the night and walking around the apartment. Once, she caught him sitting in the dark garage for over an hour, staring at the concrete wall. He brushed it off, saying work was getting to him. The turning point came when detectives decided to search the garage thoroughly. Behind a false panel near the storage area, they discovered a waterproof duffel bag. Inside were tightly wrapped packets of white powder, later confirmed to be high-purity cocaine. Next to them was a second bag filled with bundled cash totaling over $200,000. The find changed everything. Edmund Blake, the respected banker, was now a suspected drug trafficker. But something didn't add up. The evidence seemed both excessive and oddly placed. For someone as careful and intelligent as Edmund, it made little sense to hide such a damning stash in his own garage, especially knowing he could be easily linked to it. Investigators theorized that he wasn't the mastermind but possibly a mule. Someone trusted in the financial world, using his position to launder money or transport goods. His disappearance, then, might have been a silencing act. Claire was re-questioned, but her responses remained consistent. She knew nothing about the drugs or the money. However, when police searched Edmund's office, they found encrypted USB drives hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of a financial textbook. Cracking the drives took weeks, but when they finally did, they uncovered a set of emails and message logs that suggested Edmund had been in contact with several anonymous users under code names like Orion, Mirrorman, and Delton. The language in the messages hinted at a broader operation. Coded discussions about logistics, money drops, and something referred to only as mirror flow. Investigators had no idea what that meant, but it was clear that Edmund wasn't acting alone. He had become part of something far more structured and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Then, out of nowhere, a new message arrived in the same encrypted inbox. It read, "You're looking too deep. Let the mirror break." After that, the inbox was wiped clean remotely. Someone was watching the investigation unfold, someone who wanted Edmund Blake, and everything he knew, erased. Liam Carroll had always been seen as a local hero in Manchester. At 31, he had worked as a paramedic for nearly a decade and had saved more lives than most people could count. He was known for his calm presence during crises, the kind of man who could deliver a baby in a traffic jam or perform CPR for 10 minutes straight without losing focus. That's why no one could understand how he ended up crashing an ambulance into a lamppost at 3 in the morning, on a night when he wasn't even scheduled to work. The crash didn't cause any major injuries, but the odd timing raised suspicion. When officers arrived on the scene, Liam was disoriented and agitated. A toxicology report later revealed cocaine in his bloodstream, recent high-dose usage. For someone in emergency services, it was a serious offense. He was suspended immediately and taken into custody for further questioning. What began as a simple internal investigation quickly turned into something much darker. During a routine search of his apartment, detectives found a hidden compartment behind the bathroom mirror. Inside was a burner phone, a notebook filled with delivery routes, and a list of coded names and times. At first, police assumed he was a user with side dealings. But when they cross-referenced the addresses from the notebook, they were stunned. The locations weren't back alleys or rundown flats. They were high-end offices, boutique gyms, elite clubs, and even private clinics. Liam had been running drugs to some of the most prestigious places in Manchester. What made it even more disturbing was how perfect his cover had been. Dressed in paramedic gear and driving an ambulance, he could walk into nearly any building unquestioned. Security guards assumed he was responding to emergencies. Traffic officers let him pass without issue. For months, maybe longer, Liam had been delivering packages of cocaine while appearing to save lives. When asked why he risked everything, Liam claimed he was pressured into it by someone he met at a nightclub. Her name was Sadie Monroe, and she managed a trendy bar in Soho. At first glance, Sadie was just another glamorous nightlife figure, charismatic, stylish, and connected. But behind the scenes, she was running one of the most discreet and powerful drug distribution channels in the region. Sadie's operation was smart. She avoided street-level dealers and instead built a client base of wealthy professionals who could afford premium prices and wouldn't draw attention. She used couriers like Liam, people with respectable jobs and no criminal records, to avoid suspicion. Deliveries were fast, clean, and quiet. Payments were made through cryptocurrency, and orders were placed using encrypted messaging apps. Everything about her business was designed to blend into the very fabric of everyday British society. Investigators traced Sadie's movements and communications. They uncovered security footage of her hosting private parties with some of her regular clients: lawyers, doctors, finance managers, and even a sitting judge. It was a closed world where money protected reputation, and no one dared to ask too many questions. Her operation had gone undetected for years, camouflaged by privilege and trust. But with Liam's arrest, the first thread had been pulled. And once detectives followed it far enough, they realized that Sadie wasn't operating alone. She was part of something much larger, something connected to the strange messages found on Edmund Blake's USB drive. The term mirror flow appeared again in one of Sadie's encrypted conversations. It wasn't a coincidence. By the time police moved to arrest Sadie, she was already gone. Her apartment was empty, her accounts wiped, her trail cold. Only one message was left on a piece of paper taped to her closet mirror. Objects appear closer than they are. It didn't make sense to investigators at the time, but the phrase would reappear in another case months later. The network was bigger, faster, and smarter than anyone had imagined, and it was far from finished. Oscar Flint was only 19 when he died, but the shockwaves his death sent through Bristol's university community were anything but ordinary. It happened during a final exam in a crowded lecture hall. One moment he was scribbling answers furiously, the next he collapsed forward onto his desk, completely unresponsive. Emergency services arrived within minutes. but Oscar was pronounced dead at the scene. What initially looked like a heart failure case quickly turned into something far more complicated. The toxicology report revealed that Oscar had taken an unusually high dose of cocaine mixed with anti-anxiety medication. The combination had overloaded his heart. For most students, the story might have ended there, a cautionary tale about drug abuse under academic pressure. But when police retrieved Oscar's phone, the true story began to unravel. His messages weren't the kind sent by someone occasionally dabbling in drugs. They were organized, coded, and consistent. Orders taken, deliveries scheduled, payment confirmations marked with digital timestamps. Oscar was no ordinary user. He was a key distributor in what appeared to be a highly structured campus-wide drug network. The most chilling part was how invisible it had all been. The operation didn't involve shady handoffs in alleyways or late-night meetups behind pubs. Everything ran through encrypted apps, with drug drop points hidden in ordinary locations. Library lockers, under benches in quiet gardens, even taped beneath chairs in lecture halls. Students would receive a code, retrieve their package, and pay through crypto wallets. It was fast, anonymous, and shockingly efficient. Oscar wasn't working alone. His phone linked him to at least 6 other students across multiple departments, each responsible for different sectors of the university halls, faculty offices, athletic centers, and off-campus housing. They were operating like a business, complete with delivery windows, order confirmations, and tiered pricing based on purity and quantity. But one name stood out in the messages: the mentor. Every student dealer Oscar had message referred to someone called the mentor, a figure who provided instructions, guidance, and even legal advice. The mentor never used their real name and never showed their face. They only communicated through secure platforms, and their words carried weight. Follow protocol. Never carry more than you're willing to lose. If approached, disappear. The mentor was more than a boss. They were a designer of the system. Tracing the digital trail back to its source led investigators to a shock discovery. The server IP bounced through multiple countries but eventually landed in the UK, in a quiet Surrey village. The name attached to the encrypted domain was registered to none other than Professor Henry Dalmore, a highly respected academic and former advisor to Parliament on organized crime and drug policy. Dalmore had spent years lecturing about how criminal networks adapt in modern times. He had warned about the dangers of high-tech drug syndicates and proposed digital surveillance reforms. But behind closed doors, he had used that very knowledge to build his own empire. He had recruited students across various universities, offering them not just money, but education on how to survive in the trade. His materials included fake legal manuals, risk management spreadsheets, and pre-written messages to use if arrested. He called it a resistance economy, a phrase repeated in the private notes stored on his devices. When the police arrived at his home, they found no signs of distress. The professor was calm, composed, sipping tea in a study filled with books. He claimed innocence and blamed identity theft. But behind a false panel in his fireplace, investigators found a hard drive filled with chat logs, cryptocurrency keys, and student records, all linked to the mentor. It became clear that Dalmore wasn't just guiding young dealers. He was shaping the next generation of criminal minds, embedded in the very system meant to educate them. And Oscar Flint's death had exposed it all. Jenna Miles had never been on the radar of law enforcement. At just 26, she ran a modest organic farm on the outskirts of Whitefield, a quiet village in Yorkshire where nothing ever seemed to happen. Her social media was filled with photos of livestock, sunflower fields, and artisan jams. Locals saw her as a peaceful, self-sufficient woman who kept mostly to herself and occasionally sold produce at the weekend market. So when her lifeless body was discovered in the middle of her barn, surrounded by broken glass and the charred remains of lab equipment, the entire town went into shock. At first glance, the scene suggested an accident. The barn had partially caught fire, and there were signs of a struggle. But the fire had started in a strange way. Specific parts of the barn had been targeted, leaving other areas untouched. Investigators soon realized this wasn't the result of a robbery gone wrong. This was a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence. The true nature of Jenna's activities came to light when forensic teams examined the damaged section of the barn and found traces of advanced hydroponic equipment, chemical testing kits, and what appeared to be genetically modified coca plants, native to South America, but somehow thriving in the UK climate. It was an anomaly. Coca plants were notoriously difficult to grow outside tropical environments, and yet here they were, hidden in the hills of Yorkshire. Further analysis showed that Jenna had been experimenting with synthetic gene editing, likely splicing the coca DNA with hardier, climate-resistant strains. Experts confirmed that such a breakthrough would have been groundbreaking in both agricultural and criminal circles. If cocaine could be cultivated and refined domestically, it would eliminate the need for risky import routes and drastically reduce costs for drug networks. Investigators followed the trail of purchases Jenna had made: scientific tools, industrial lights, and rare chemical compounds. Many of these had been delivered to an off-grid cabin she kept hidden on a neighboring property, which had been modified into a full-scale processing lab. Invoices and receipts, however, revealed she hadn't been working alone. Bank records linked Jenna to a name that investigators had already encountered: Professor Henry Dalmore, the same man tied to the student drug network through the alias, the Mentor. It appeared Jenna had been one of his earliest collaborators. She had taken his theories on drug supply decentralization and turned them into practice, creating a proof of concept that domestic production of cocaine was not only possible, it was already happening. But the operation hadn't gone unnoticed by everyone. A second name surfaced during the investigation: Ronnie Tills, a former contractor who had helped Jenna build her greenhouse system. He had a record for minor offenses, mostly theft and fraud, but nothing violent. Still, neighbors had seen him arguing with Jenna weeks before her death, and his fingerprints were found on a scorched toolbox near the lab. Confronted with evidence, Ronnie confessed. He had partnered with Jenna at first, lured by the promise of big money. But when she decided to take full control of the operation and limit his access to the processing side, he felt betrayed. During a heated argument, things escalated. He struck her and, in panic, tried to stage an accidental fire to cover up the crime. What he didn't expect was the amount of forensic material that would survive. He was arrested, charged, and sentenced. But Jenna's death sent a ripple effect through the underground network. She had been more than just a farm girl. She had been the architect of a radical shift in the cocaine trade, one that bypassed borders entirely. Her story exposed how deep the network had grown, and how far it was willing to go to innovate and survive. Whitefield Farm wasn't just a crime scene. It was a glimpse into the future of drug trafficking. Hidden behind wooden fences and rows of sunflowers, the fall of the Mirror Syndicate began not with a police raid, but with an anonymous data leak. In early 2021, an encrypted folder titled Mirror Log Final was sent to the National Crime Agency through a dark web Dropbox. Inside were spreadsheets, message logs, cryptocurrency wallet histories, addresses, and names, dozens of names. What started as isolated incidents in different corners of Britain suddenly connected like pieces of a puzzle. From the vanished banker in London to the farm murder in Yorkshire, all paths converged onto one invisible structure: the Mirror Syndicate. The name had appeared repeatedly throughout the investigation. On Edmund Blake's hidden drives, in Sadie Monroe's coded messages, and even in Professor Dalmore's instructions. Until the leak, authorities believed the syndicate was a loose alliance of criminals. But the files told a different story. It wasn't just a group, it was a decentralized machine, structured like a corporate enterprise with departments, protocols, and performance metrics. Each operator had a unique role. Some handled logistics, others finance. One group focused solely on recruitment, targeting individuals with clean records and access to elite social environments. Instead of street dealers, they used professionals: paramedics, bankers, students, researchers. They blended into society with surgical precision. Their goal was not only to sell drugs, but to embed their business into the country's systems without ever drawing attention. The Mirror Syndicate didn't have a leader in the traditional sense. It ran on encrypted instructions distributed through mirror drops, temporary communication windows that disappeared after 24 hours. Payments were processed via shell companies and laundered through consulting firms, real estate deals, and cryptocurrency investments. No phone calls. No permanent records. Just fragments, all designed to disappear as quickly as they appeared. But someone inside had grown tired of the silence. The whistleblower's identity was never revealed, but their data was irrefutable. With it, the National Crime Agency launched Operation Prism, a sweeping effort that mobilized multiple task forces across the UK. Within a week, 63 arrests were made. Among them were high-profile individuals: a tech CEO, a retired judge, a shipping magnate, and a former police officer. Their homes and offices concealed stockpiles of drugs, burner phones, ledgers, and untraceable assets. Yet the operation did not come without consequences. When agents arrived at Professor Henry Dalmore's home for the second time, they found him dead in his study, slumped over his desk with an empty bottle beside him. A note was taped to the wall, bearing only 2 words: "Too deep." Some believed it was suicide. Others insisted it was a staged warning, a signal to others who might speak. Despite the arrests, much of the Mirror Syndicate's infrastructure remained untouched. The network was built to withstand attacks. For every piece dismantled, another seemed to shift and adapt elsewhere. Investigators discovered cloned operations already starting in Scotland and parts of Europe, using identical methods. It became clear that the syndicate hadn't just infiltrated society, it had become a part of it. In the months that followed, news cycles moved on, and public interest faded. The story of the Mirror Syndicate was folded into documentaries and podcasts, but few grasped the real lesson. Cocaine was no longer just a substance of back alleys and nightlife. It had slipped into office buildings, boardrooms, farms, universities, and clinics. The system that carried it wasn't crude. It was intelligent, evolving, and disturbingly normal. The leak had torn the mirror down, but behind it, the reflection remained. A distorted image of a society addicted not only to a drug, but to the illusion that everything was still under control.